Hello, and welcome to session 6.1, Understanding the Importance of and Best Practices for Your Unsheltered Point in Time Count. To communicate with each other, please use the chat feature to the right of the video player. If you have questions for the speakers, please submit them using the questions feature. Session slides should be available in the materials box when you log into the schedule. If they're not there, they'll be available within 48 hours to 72 hours, along with the recordings of the session. And we ask that you remember to take the session survey, which is also in the main schedule. When you click on the link to this workshop, you should have a link to the session survey. So we ask for your feedback because we do take that very seriously and it helps inform future conferences. And without any further ado, I'd like to kick things over to Kat Durant, who's going to talk to us about work on the point in time count. Kat?
Hi, great. Thank you, Jackie. It's great to be here at the NAEH conference, even if it is virtual. Hopefully we'll be together soon in person at our conferences. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of unsheltered homelessness in San Diego County and changes in methodology that we've done to our point in time count since 2018 to improve our best practices around our point in time count. Next slide. So the Regional Task Force on Homelessness is the COC for San Diego County. We cover the whole county. This is kind of a visual here of our county. It is broken into 5 different areas that we, with the city of San Diego being the central most populated part of our county, but there are 18 cities in our county and over 3 million people. So this is some information from our 2020 point in time count. We did not do a point in time count on sheltered in 2021, like most of us did not. Also, our point in time count for this year has been pushed back and will be happening next week. But you can see just from the numbers that from our 2020 point in time count, we knew minimally that there were 7,619 people experiencing homelessness in our region. And of those, 52% or about 4,000 people were experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our region. And the majority of those were in the city of San Diego. Next slide. So when we talk about our annual point in time count, we do it annually in San Diego County. It is challenging. It's challenging because we cover the whole county. We are the 5th most populous county in the country. So it's almost like approaching an overall state, like counting a whole state as a perspective, because we do have metropolis areas such as the city of San Diego and other cities, and then very rural unincorporated areas. We do our count by census tracts. We count 602 of our 627 census tracts. It's about 4,000 square miles, 2,000 miles of road. So it is a challenge. So the way that we attack this challenge is with our volunteers. Next slide. Our volunteer numbers. So San Diego as a community is very involved in our point in time count. Annually, we have about 1,000 community members that sign up to do the point in time count. They generally volunteer at the deployment sites within their neighborhoods where they live. We have 35 deployment sites the night of the count. On top of those 1,000 community members, we also have county staff. The county works with us by paying their staff members to volunteer for the point in time count. It is part of their workday. So their workday just starts at 4 a.m. when the count begins and then just ends early that day. And then in addition to that, we have about 200 outreach workers this year signed up to help us with the count. They will be covering areas where they normally cover daily, so that the people that they're engaging during the count are familiar with their faces, and they will be leading our volunteers in teams all across the region. Next slide. So when we talk about our almost 1,500 to 1,700 volunteers each year, they do sign up on a a virtual website, and we do create a training video, a YouTube video for them each year. And they have different roles that they can do during the point in time count. So we, since 2020, have been using a mobile app. So we have volunteers that will do the survey, observational, or the full survey on the device, on their device, their mobile phone. There's others that will just manage the census tract they count in. We hand out gift cards, socks, and resource guides, so you can be the person that hands out materials. And then we also have many census tracts that are just driven and done observationally. So you could be the person driving the car or observing people as you're driving through the different census tracts. Next slide. So from our 2020 engagement efforts, we were able to survey just over 1,750 people during the night of the count. This included 3 days of targeted follow-up with outreach and our staff at the regional task force. And of those that we surveyed and counted, we were able to survey 534 people or observe them that were sleeping in their vehicles, trucks, or RVs. And that was a great, a large portion of that 3 days of targeted follow-up with outreach was engaging people living in their vehicles. Next slide. So I talked a little bit at the beginning about changing our methodology from 2018 to 2020. And this was based on guidance from HUD. We received HUD TA around changing our methodology. And the purpose was to change our methodology from being a mainly observational based count to a survey based count. And this is so that we could collect more solid demographic data from those that we were counting and use that for planning purposes throughout the year in different housing initiatives. So objectively, as any community, our goal is to reduce and homelessness. And in order to do that, we needed solid data and we needed to rely less on extrapolation, observation of people out there experiencing homelessness and derive more of the data from the people out there on the streets by surveying them. Next slide. So a few items that changed. San Diego does do a blitz count. So we were not engaging enough of the street population, as I said, the night of the count. And so HUD wanted us to speak to and survey more people. So that did require reducing the number of questions on our survey, as well as making sure that our volunteers were trained in how to engage people and survey them as quickly as possible so that we could reach more people. Extrapolated data should not be a basis for the report. So previously we were only speaking to about 20% of people and then extrapolating 80% of the data. And that was the report that we're giving to HUD each year. So they wanted us to switch that number. So our goal is to survey and engage 80% of people the night of the count and only observationally count 20%. And in 2020, we got that number to about 45%, and we look to increase that again this year. Additionally, we were using multipliers when we counted vehicles, RVs, and tents or hand-built structures. And this multiplier changed each year and was based on that 20% of households that we did survey the night of the count. We created a multiplier from household data. And so we were guided that as a community, we should be counting people and not structures or vehicles. So we removed the multiplier, and that did require us to, a retraining process and messaging to our stakeholders and community members about why we're removing the multiplier and what that meant. And especially that around people counting in RVs and removing that multiplier. So now for cars, RVs, and tents, we use a knock and talk method. And this does include follow-up. So there's a lot of follow-up for RVs, especially. San Diego has a high population of visitors in their RVs, especially in the winter months, the last week of January. So you cannot assume that if you see an RV that there are people in it and that those people are experiencing homelessness. So you need to knock and talk and ask them. And if so, then you would survey them and you would include that number in the count. That is the same with people in tents. You want to make sure that there's someone in a tent, not just count a tent and assume somebody is there. The other big change that we made in 2020 was the introduction of using a mobile app. So when you are trying to engage 80% of the people, that's a lot of paper surveys. So, and even if the best planning, you could come across a census tract that had more people than previously and not have enough surveys. So there you missed out on the opportunity of surveying enough people. So having a mobile app, it just, there's unlimited amount of surveys that you can do. And also it saves not just money on materials, but staff time and resources. So that was a major change that we made. Next slide. This is actually a slide from our training video this year on counting people living in RVs. So we let our volunteers know that it's critical that we're counting people, not vehicles or RVs. And that if you come across someone in an RV and you suspect that someone is living in it and you're not able to engage them, that you can do on the mobile app, you can fill out the observational survey and include additional information like the vehicle license plate number and maybe a brief description of where the vehicle is located. We do have GIS information on that observational survey, the longitude and latitude, so we will be able to find it even without that description. And then what we do is we will send a follow-up outreach and RTFH task force staff. We go out in the next few days to those locations and try to engage the people that are in those RVs and ask them if they are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. We also provide in our training just a little bit of a survey do and don't. So if someone is living in their vehicle, this is most likely it's going to look like the do survey or do engage people and not the do not survey. So what we're trying to get people to determine is if an RV is parked in front of a residential home, it's most likely not going to be someone experiencing homelessness in that RV. It could just be the recreational vehicle that they have parked on the street for now. So don't include that when you are doing the observational survey so that we're not going back and trying to re-engage a vehicle that does not have somebody in it. Next slide. A little bit too of the technology highlights that we've increased use of during our count. We do work with our local police jurisdictions all throughout our county. This is really important in our unincorporated in more rural areas, especially. We use drones and helicopters. They're flown the week of the count or the week before the count over areas known to have people living in them, such as our riverbeds and canyons. We use that information so that the people that are counting in those areas can target specifically where people are and not having to walk the entire riverbed or in canyons. It's, making sure you can just walk down into the canyon to the area where people are and then engage them in the count. So the thermal imaging does really significantly reduce the amount of time of walking, and also it allows our outreach staff to find people during the daytime in limited amount of hours. And then the other big improvement, like I said, was the mobile app. So you're able to save notes on the general surveys and observational surveys. This helps us to immediately follow up as the count is ending. So it's a 4-hour count. We do a 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. But we do have a team of outreach that are prepped and ready to go as soon as the count is completing. And we can send them back out to areas that we can immediately see, real-time information of areas that need additional coverage. And we can send them out to complete the count in those areas and collect surveys. Also, with the use of real-time data coming in, I myself was able to call volunteers on their cell phones and get clarification on some data points that morning when it was still fresh in their minds. If it looked like they maybe crossed over to a different census tract and somebody was counted more than once, I was able to clarify with them. And then also during the COVID crisis, when the pandemic began, the data from the count was used to help inform our county as where to place hand washing stations, because we were able to look at the maps and see areas of high concentration of unsheltered people. And then also if there was people in that area, because we did collect demographics that were over 55 and might have needed additional assistance, we were able to provide that for them as well. Next slide. That's it for me. So now I'm going to hand this over to Markea Watson. She's with the Greater City Coalition to End Homelessness in Kansas City.
Hi, thank you, Kat. So when Matt and we've talked about this subject at the National Human Services Data Consortium at its last conference, and kind of have built upon this idea around what do you do with your point in time data that can really help you to develop solutions. So like we do the count, but then now what? So Kat's point about, determining that we need more hand washing stations at a specific location, that's really important information that you would not get if you didn't put your boots on the ground and do a count. There's other kind of upstream and systemic kind of solutions to homelessness that we've been looking for, if you don't mind advancing the slide, in our data, and really thinking about racial equity really as a social driver of health, and trying to make the case for housing and healthcare being inextricably linked, and to get more resources into the community for those purposes. I think, though, that Kansas City has had a reckoning through COVID, recognizing that the historical legacy of slavery, of redlining, of just discriminatory practices in general have really driven this problem, and in particular that we have an issue around homelessness amongst Black men, where unsheltered homelessness is really a predominant issue. So applying a racial equity lens to this work, I think, is incredibly important, simply for the sake of understanding what's driving the issue, but then figuring out who really needs to be in the conversation and what to do to upend it. So we're looking at visualizing our HMIS data to address disparities, but first we have to understand what those disparities are. Next slide. So this is actually some analysis that Matt had done with his team on our HMIS point in time data and compared it to our census tract data. Our COC includes, we straddle a state line in Kansas City COC, so we're partially in Jackson County, Missouri, and partially in Wyandotte County, Kansas. That presents a whole host of challenges, but also some unique opportunities, right? And so if you look at the actual boundaries of our continuum of care, it doesn't look like our census tracts. And so if you go to the next slide, you can see that what they've done is essentially take the shapefiles from the COC and then square those up with our census tracts to come up with a baseline comparison of what our HMIS data reflect versus what our census tract data reflect. And when you look at the data side by side, you see that there's immediately an issue that jumps off the page. So where we've got 50% of our folks, or I'm sorry, 51% of our folks in HMIS are identified as Black or African American. Only 21.6% of Black or African American folks represent those counted in the census. And then the reverse is true of those who are identified as white. Next slide. And then on this scatter plot, it just shows you, if you click one more time, the red line is the trend line for the number of folks in HMIS, and then the little blue dots, and that light gray trend line are the census. And so you can see that there's one outlier along this red trend line, but predominantly we know that there's a huge disparity between the number of people that should be captured in HMIS versus those who are in there. Next slide. And Kansas City is unique, and I've had a unique experience living here. I've been here for about 17 years now, and I'm from California, and I always thought that California was a much more kind of melting pot kind of society than it is, because you don't visibly see the historical legacy of segregation in quite a pronounced way, like you do in Kansas City. And this has everything to do with redlining. And so redlining, I think we've talked a lot about this over the last couple of years, so I won't belabor you with all of the intricacies of it, but essentially it's federally backed policies, that originated around the end of the Great Depression, or the start of the Great Depression, and kind of really blew up during World War II and into the 50s and 60s, which essentially racialized access to housing and home ownership. And so a lot of the kind of what's come out in the wash in the end of all of this is that we have really disparate life outcomes for folks that are, separated along racial lines. And this is particularly true of homelessness. There are some indicators though, and if you go to the next slide, and click one more time, please. So Kansas City for me was, when I first moved here, I was really stunned because there's a very clear dividing line between Black folks and poor folks and kind of everyone else. And, on first glance, and it's interesting because when Matt and I were working on this presentation before, as he was compiling data, he's kind of looking like, what is this line down the middle, And that happens to be a street. That red line down the middle of the map, this map is oriented so the top is north. That's Troost Avenue, and that's the historical racial divide in Kansas City. And even, 100 years into this, you can still see in every conceivable way the legacy of sequestering, some people to one side of the line and others to the other side of the line. This map, if any of you have an opportunity and are curious, it's really cool. It's an interactive map created by the University of Richmond that allows you to drill down into your own neighborhood and see the racial composition of people that lived there at the time those homes were built. And, this is older data, obviously you can tell by the map, but it's just really fascinating to see that 9 times out of 10, when you see neighborhoods that are blighted or, that have clearly been disinvested in, those were neighborhoods that were historically inhabited by people of color and predominantly by Black folks. Next slide. And so we pulled some data to just show you what this looks like in the real world. And so the little grid on the left is from a zip code along the Country Club Plaza. It's a pretty posh part of Kansas City. And it's on the west side of town, or on the west side of this dividing line. And then the zip code on the right, 64130, is 1 mile away. And it really is like a tale of two cities. The outcomes for folks could not be more different. And so where you have 91% Black people on the right side and 95% white people on the left side, you can very clearly see these kind of indicators of health, well-being, life chances and wealth attainment. All of those sorts of things look very different within a 1 mile radius. This mural is actually on Troost Avenue. It's become a famous kind of a symbol of obviously Dr. King, but just the kind of the history of Troost Avenue. And there's a lot of civic pride around that street. And it really is in a period of renaissance, though we're being very careful that it doesn't get gentrified. Click again, please. So obviously there's indicators that you look at when you're looking at, the potential for people to fall off the cliff and into homelessness. I think for us, COVID has really presented a unique opportunity. We've captured data on the Emergency Rental Assistance Program by way of an electronic platform that people would apply for the funds through one universal pathway. And so now we've got this massive data set of people that were vulnerable to housing instability because of the pandemic, so that we can start to, at some point when we get the pandemic out of our hair, start to try to conceive of, is cost burden the only thing that's driving this issue outside of, the other factors that we've already talked about? But is there a tipping point for some people that looks different for others? Are there other environmental or social factors that are contributing to some people becoming homeless and others not? We presume that there are, but we've never had the opportunity to really look all at once in a snapshot of this many people who are at risk of losing their housing. Next slide. In Kansas City, we have a uniquely small number of minority folks who are homeowners. And this data is from Kansas City, Missouri and Kansas, so it straddles where our state line is situated, but it's actually below the national average, which is disheartening. And then you can see we have a lot of folks who are cost burdened and severely cost burdened in Kansas City. Next slide. Again, just looking at Black households specifically and what their outcomes look like. The median renter household income is only $39,000 a year. We know that in Kansas City, just to even make it, you've got to be making 50. And you can tell that the median housing cost is above FMR for Kansas City, which is between $740 to $813, depending on what year your program was funded in. COC program was funded in. Next slide. Wealth gaps in education, race, all of these things intersect. And I think, these are data that we're starting to figure out, okay, so we're learning these things and we're actually paying attention. So now what do we do with them? And how do we also extrapolate from this information and that which we find in our point in time, what's actually going on, and start to mount a response to fix it. Next slide, please. Interestingly, and this map is oriented the same way that all of the others were. So you would expect that if people were just becoming homeless in their home communities, that they would stay in their home communities. And so you would see many more dots on the right side of the map than you would on the left side of the map. But that is indeed not the case. And so we have a very high concentration of kind of pockets of unsheltered homelessness. Now, there are obviously reasons why people organize themselves the way that they do. While we have a lot of resources in the downtown part of Kansas City, it's not exactly clear that that's the only reason that people are tending to congregate there. And we do see that in our unsheltered populations, people also do tend to organize themselves along racial lines, which is really fascinating. It's not, 100% the case, but we know that, for example, there's 2 big drop-in centers, and we have one group that goes to one and another group that kind of goes to the other. It's just kind of fascinating to see in all of these different kind of social institutions that we have here in town, that this legacy of racial separation is still very much a factor. When we, in 2020, we determined that we needed to do a mass sheltering effort to get people out of the blast zone of COVID and out of the cold weather. And our city manager set up a shelter inside of our convention center. We had roughly 400 people sleeping in there, at our highest kind of peak. And of all the nights that we saw people there, predominantly we would say that there's probably about 80 to 85% Black men inside the shelter. And so for me, being a person of color, being a person with lived experience and leadership in this work, I was just absolutely aghast to see this and recognize too that our unsheltered count of homelessness is only around 500, yet we had, 300 and something just Black men in this one physical location. So we realized that we weren't even counting many of them, and really have to ask ourselves why. We've come to realize that we have an issue, obviously, and that we need a lot more people that look like the people that we're trying to interact with to be able to capture data on them. The other thing is that we have a lot of populations who don't keep a 9-to-5 schedule. And so, we've recognized the need for a different type of outreach during different hours in order for us to be impactful. And much of this work has come from the work that we've been doing through COVID in our street outreach, but also information that we've gleaned in our point in time and drawing those comparisons. We also recognize that on the east side of town, some of the neighborhoods are pretty rough. And for the, just Joe Schmo volunteer doing a point in time count census, that might be difficult for people to feel comfortable in environments that are unfamiliar to them. Hence the need to have gatekeepers, ambassadors, and folks that resemble the community performing the count. We know that there are way many more people living unsheltered on the east side of town than we've captured, and we're simply not engaging them. Next slide. So we are super duper excited, and I'm trying to not do the big sales spiel here, but we're in the midst of incorporating a mobile technology for street outreach. It's created by SimTech. It's the same kind of structure as the app that we use for our point in time, but it enables us to collect data 365 days a year. So the model that you're seeing here is our PIT count where we've begun to ask a person's last known address. And the point of this is to really get various stakeholders to understand that homelessness is not just a Kansas City problem, that the suburban communities in our town have a role to play, the rural communities adjacent to us have a role to play, and that all of these people didn't just magically, show up downtown out of nowhere, but that this really is a regional issue and the responsibility to help folks is a regional one. In addition, we also want to understand more about our unsheltered population. And weirdly enough, they're the population that we are meant to focus with the most intention upon, and the population at the same time that we know the least about. And so we really want to find out people's origin story as we're working with them, because, a lot of our goal as social services people is to help folks to fix whatever's been broken. If it's the relationships, or if it's the job thing, if it's the health thing, how do we get people back to how things were when things were better, or when they were different than they are now? And sometimes that does, rely on us tracing breadcrumbs with people to get them back home. Next question. Slide. And then we've started also thinking, we just pulled this example about youth because we also have to think about intersection. So I always say that all of the isms learn from racism, and so it really is important to center your equity work in race, but then to also look at intersections, because people are complex and have a lot more than just one identity, and sadly enough, the more intersectionality that a person experiences, the more marginalization they are likely to experience, and especially while experiencing homelessness at the same time. So with our youth population, we're just starting to understand now a lot more about people who are being trafficked. Kansas City is a big hub for human trafficking. We're understanding that there's a race component to that, and that there are many people that haven't been counted in the past, and we're starting to learn how to engage with them, all by way of utilizing all of these data sources in conjunction with our PIT to make the case for those efforts. And I think that's all I have. Oh, and so this is the concept that Matt and I have been talking about a little bit, and I really love it. So I did a racial equity training, and the convener, she said, that we're in the business of looking at the fish and wondering, every time I go to the shore, I see 4 or 5 fish on the shore and they're dead. What's wrong with these fish? When you have 1 fish that's floating, that's the fish. When you have 5 fish that are floating, it's the pond. And so we have to be thinking about what's wrong with the water and how do we treat the water, rather than one by one trying to fix the fish, because the fish aren't the thing that's broken. There you go.
Well said. Well, hello everyone. My name is Matt Simmons. I'm president of Simtech Solutions. I've had the privilege of working with Markea and Kat to support the point in time counts, as well as many of you on this call. This year we have 57 regions currently, and maybe a few more still signing on, the ones that did the extension to the end of February. And I am just going, next slide, please. So a quick background. So we have a mobile tech for street outreach. We have a data warehouse to ingest data from HMIS systems that whatever people use. We have a mobile app for the point in time count. And then we've also done a fair amount of writing guidance and conducting research. Basically, we're trying in every way we can to fill the gaps left behind in HMIS to better understand and quantify homelessness, to help people that are experiencing it, to help lift them out of their current situation. So if there's another tool that we need to build, we'll build it. But we really lean on the communities and the input from people that have lived experience, the people that are doing the street outreach, to help shape our technology. Next slide, please. So a fair amount of what we're going to share today is in reaction. Well, it's not in reaction to, we've been doing this work for a while, but the GAO has a report that came out last year that was basically causing some stir, in that there are a fair number of communities that had a pretty large swing. So if you look at the chart on the left, the unsheltered, there's percentage of COCs with changes greater than 50%. That's a significant swing year over year for the unsheltered counts. The sheltered, you're not going to see that much of a swing typically because you have stated number of beds. You can't fluctuate that wildly. So it would be an anomaly to have 150 people and 100 beds. I mean, yes, you can have overflow, but that's kind of, that's pushing it. But on the unsheltered, there's the numbers were changing significantly for some COCs. And there's different reasons why that might be. It could be methodological variation. So what Kat had talked about as an example, they changed their methodology and really went from an observation-based count to really trying to survey people and changing the way they count people in RVs. That's an example that can cause some deviation from year to year. There could be some sampling error or bias. Communities are struggling with getting enough volunteers, especially with COVID this year, but it's a big ask. You have some very large continuums of care. We support 13 balance of state COCs. Imagine trying to get enough volunteers to cover all of South Dakota or Nevada or Texas. It's not an easy task. So there could be, some fluctuation just that, with that as well. We do see in the news reports of increased arrests or sweeps right before some counts. I think this, you're seeing in the news that the homelessness issue is becoming more and more politicized. So, we do have to have that lens on what's happening too. Sometimes there's an agenda to have the counts go down, even if that is the detriment to your own funding, because politically it makes you look better. So not naming communities or anything, but that may happen. In New England, where I am from, I'm now in San Diego, so I don't have the same issue. The weather can shift wildly from year over year. So, people will tend to use the resources they have until they've burned out those bridges. So there may be a time with this freezing rain, you're going to make a phone call or, you're going to get a hold of someone. You're like, hey, can I sleep on your couch tonight? And you take advantage of that when you really need to. But then if it warms up, you're going to go back out to the streets, you're going to go to shelter. I can get by. I don't need to lean on that person this week or today. So when you do see the weather really get slammed in New England, in particular, the winds and rain, people will find a way to get inside if they can. So that should be accounted for. Hopefully you'll see the numbers in shelter, but just keep it, there's also a population that will go double up and then they don't get counted. For HMIS, you have unreliable HMIS data at times. You've got some communities that just don't have a firm grasp of their daily census. People they enroll people, they don't exit them out, or they don't enter them in at all. And then also with the housing inventory charts, sorry for the acronyms, there are times when a community will make a decision after having a program on their HIC for years. They're like, you know what, that transitional housing program, they don't really just serve homeless people and we can't get people, so we got to take it off, so there'll be switches, but when you change that denominator and you don't recast the figures from before, that's going to affect your trends. So that really ideally should be accounted for, but it doesn't always happen. So the GAO recommendations, better data quality checks, tighten methodologies, as far as improving guidance that HUD provides to others. Sampling in general, you need to lean on a statistician. We do ourselves, as far as making sure any models that you put in place have what's called statistical rigor. Next slide, please. There are some, nuances to conducting a point in time count during COVID. There's a link at the bottom of this. If you can lean on your existing outreach teams, that's the ideal, right? People that already have a relationship with people, they know them, they can breeze through the surveys. Ideally, information is already captured and they're just taking attendance on the night of the count. And that's, then you're lightening the load, spreading out the work year round. If you do need to do observation-based counts, there's the idea of suggesting that someone's homeless to begin with, but then you also have to lean on what you believe their perceived race is, what their perceived age range, et cetera. So you try to avoid those wherever possible, but people do that. You can shorten the survey lengths, if you need to, again, for COVID, expand that window of time that you're doing the count. use that full 7 days post count to make sure you're asking where were you homeless on the night of. And if you're using GPS-based mobile tech, like we want to make sure you're capturing where they were that night, not where you're interacting with them today. So that when we go to do any analysis, it's really based on that Tuesday in February or January, not throughout the week. So mobile tech does support help because you're not less passing of things, and then just better training in general. So sampling can help backfill. Is another way to do it. So you can, if you don't have full coverage because of COVID, less volunteers, you may need to do some sampling and enumeration strategies, which I'll explain in a second. Next slide, please. So options to improve the accuracy of your count. Try to boost your volunteer numbers if you can. So and the image to the right is from Solano County in California. Using social media, leaning on existing staff, like Kat mentioned in San Diego, they lean on county staff. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Up front, trying to drop pinpoints on a map with whatever tools you have to identify known locations, so that way you can concentrate your volunteers to those areas and do some targeting. Again, use your outreach staff, use your public officials, your park rangers, your librarians, etc. They're public servants, and the homeless population is part of the public, so ideally you bring them in. Broaden that window of the count, and then sampling and enumeration as needed to make sure it's a tight estimate. Next slide, please. This is just an example of a volunteer registration portal. It might be a couple clicks here. Share some key information. This one's from Dallas, Texas. You want to create well-balanced count teams. So you're using this information up front to figure out who you have to work with, where they want to volunteer. If you think of like a large community like Texas Balance, the state that we work with, you can't send a volunteer from the northwest corner to the southeast corner. It's just not going to happen. So what communities are they willing to operate in? And then you're creating balanced count teams from that. And ideally, you have a mix of people of different skills. Someone with a smartphone, someone, if you're going to an area where, predominantly, Spanish is spoken, for example, you want someone that Spanish is their native tongue. And to Markea's point, ideally you want people to look like the people that they're counting. Like, you want people that like to, open up to people that are similar to them. Assimilation, it's in our nature, I guess. And they want to be comfortable with those streets, so they know where to look. Next slide, please. So this is how we actually use those known locations. So again, you can use the window of time between, throughout the year to drop pinpoints on a map. And you can actually use that for mapping and then to establish count teams based on those areas that that there's a high likelihood of people there being experiencing homelessness. It could be just as simple as dropping a pinpoint on a map, or it could be a byproduct of ongoing street outreach, where it's not just a pinpoint, it shows a longitudinal picture of someone's travels throughout the community. So again, you can get density patterns and you can figure out where to allocate resources based on that. You might be a couple clicks on this one. And the other benefit of this, it's a very simple way. If you're using mobile tech, the same mobile app for the point in time count, this is a one question survey. How many people that you believe are experiencing homelessness are in this location? It's a way for you to know they've registered for, they downloaded the app, they registered an account, and they can do a survey. So it's a training tool as well. Next slide, please. And as far as, working with what you have, so your recipe is basically, we need to create this final report, that's what you need to go to HUD, but your ingredients are going to be your volunteers and the resources you have to work with. How are you going to allocate them effectively? So you're going to use that data to help spread it out. Next slide, please. Now, another option that we can do if we don't have enough coverage is we have to think about how can we still derive a reliable estimate off of what we do have. So, you can just, some communities, what they've done in the past is we're going to do our best, and this number of surveys we get is the number of surveys we get. Well, if they only covered half the continuum of care, and next year they covered 2/3, well, you should expect the numbers to increase. By doing sampling, there's two different options of sampling that we support. One is trying to do a census, a full census of the whole area, and literally it's doing counting, and you're trying to count people at night while they're still sleeping. So you have to be pretty sure they're sleeping and they're homeless on the streets. And then you survey a random selection of them, of people during the day, and you apply the percentages for the demographics to the census. So that's one way approach to do it. Next slide, please. And the other approach that we support is called geographic sampling and enumeration. Actually, I had the privilege of working with Jackie from National Alliance when she was in Connecticut on this. But what we're doing here is we are sending out volunteers to all of the areas that are designated high probability. So we figure that out front. We work with outreach teams. We work with people from the community to say, where do we know people experiencing homelessness are going to be? And then from there, that gives us a remainder. And that remainder is all of our low probability groups. So, you know, in this case, let's say we covered, 30% of the state, we're going to say high probability of containing someone experiencing homelessness. Send people there, and then we're going to do a random sample of the remaining 70%. And in doing that, the benefit of the randomness and the size of all this, of the number of census tracts, is we can actually derive a statistically reliable estimate through just what we cover and apply. Say we recover half of the remainder, we can just double that figure to create an estimate for all the low probability tracts and add that to the high probability tracts to create final figures. So it's a way to get by of canvassing an entire giant area with only having to cover a part of it. Next slide, please. So when you're doing surveys, mobile apps, people are more and more familiar with them. 3/4 of the U.S. population, according to the Pew Institute, of the adults have a smartphone. So we're good there. You don't have to provide tablets. People can use their own device. It's a one-way post of information, so you don't have to worry about people like logging in and pulling information about someone that's homeless. And what we can do is it's as simple as getting like something like this. It's a getting started flyer. There's a volunteer registration portal. They download the app. They have a setup key that ties the data to their region. And then they're given some basic guidance. They can click on the map to see where they've been assigned. And so it's an area within their community, and they go out and they conduct the surveys, and then they're done. And the data is all captured in real time, and we can see where people are going. If someone strays, we'll see that they strayed, and we can steer them back in. If they missed something as far as like they forgot to enter a gender or a race, and we don't require that field, which we can, but we can always follow up in the command center, send a text or whatever you need to do, and try to fill it up in real time, versus the paper-based approach that we used to do back in 2012, which is when we made the switch over to mobile tech, where once the data came in all the paper forms, there's no way to go back and find out, what was missing, or like if they strayed, you wouldn't know that. So it's one of the benefits of just having everything tied in. Now, beyond that, ideally, what we want to be able to do too is curate by name lists throughout the year. And also manage details on encampments that people are living in. So, CDC and with COVID, encampments are a real deal. In California, unfortunately, there's too much prevalence with encampments. But if we can allow people to shelter in place, we're supporting them where they are until we can get them into housing. And, just like we'd have an HMIS, we enroll people into projects, we can do the same thing and associate people to encampments. And that way, if outreach worker, A, comes into encampment on Monday, they have a list of people they're working with, but they don't work on Wednesday. The next time someone comes in, there's already information about that person. And you're curating, if you will, like almost a CRM for people that are on the streets. So you're actually getting to know people. We can throw up pictures. One of the providers that we work with provides showers, remote showers. And he doesn't remember everyone's names, but he can actually go into an encampment and look at the pictures and be able to associate, and introduce himself and greet person by name. So again, it's not, what we're trying to do is move away from this annual exercise to an ongoing one where you're really getting to know your homeless population, and you're working with them over time, building relationship and nudging them towards housing. In this encampment piece too, there's a lot of benefits to knowing is it a sanctioned encampment? Are we going to provide certain things like portable toilets, dumpsters, etc.? Do those things need to be maintained? Because without any other options, we're really kind of stuck. So we really need to make sure that people have something that's suitable for living. So we're trying to do what we can based on the lack of permanent housing. Next slide, please. So again, the idea of having it, captured year round is really just to support the person, not have it just be an accounting exercise, which it is now, unfortunately for a fair amount of people. And then at the end, when we're working towards this, get rid of the point in time exercise altogether. You can still do it, there's something called sampling bias, where engagement bias, where outreach teams might also just go to the certain areas that they know that are having people experience homelessness. So you still need to potentially go out and have a full canvas, but at least you'll have most information already there to work off of. So I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but the idea is that you're really getting to know people, allowing that coordination with the other outreach team members, and just building up a story over time, and eventually including the person that's homeless themselves in their own journey. I think a lot of times we have this concept of we're going to dictate where you go, take out freedom of choice. People have their support networks, they have their communities, whether you're housed or you're unhoused, you've got your people, and we want to be able to foster those relationships, because oftentimes 4 walls and a bed isn't enough. And we see that when we see the attrition back into homelessness. So we're trying to, have them be part of their own story. Next slide, please. So all the data comes into the regional command center. This is just an example. This is where you can see the data in real time as the demo data, generate a point in time report with a few clicks. But the sharing here is to basically, we already have limited capacity with the staffing. We have limited resources financially coming into our communities, and we're trying to automate some of those things that are unwieldy and a pain. So if we can, take that burden off of, your frontline staff to do all the data capture and reporting and make sure it's accurate, but having vetted logic, then they can be doing other things. So that's the point of this. Next slide, please. So one of the things I'd like to tune in on as an example, and there are others, is something we do it's a partnership with Miracle Messages. I met Kevin Adler at a National Alliance conference a few years ago, and we asked one follow-on question after we asked the questions needed for HUD, and it's basically, do you have anyone in your life, loved one or your family, that you'd like to be reunited with? And if they say yes, it was a follow-on survey, and we actually capture details about that person, and then we share that information with Miracle Messages. And the benefit of, they have these digital detectives that will work with that data and try to foster that reunion. And if you hit just next one time, this is an example of a man that was homeless for 30 years. So the gentleman on the right is Michael Patrick, and Mark Askins is the digital detective on the left. But yeah, 30 years of homelessness in a park in Lake County, California. He was considered the mayor of the park. By asking that one question, facilitating a reunion, we were able to get him reconnected with his mom. He met his grandkids for the first time. He is sober. He's working and doing small engine repair. But it's like that starfish story. It's like, but for this one, and I know it's overwhelming when you think about the numbers, but if you can ask, do a little bit more during a point in time count, you can help people, just like Michael. So that's what we're trying to do here too. And I think that is it that I have. Yeah. So we did have some questions that came in throughout. Let me scroll through. All right. This question is for Kat. Kat, do people who are living in encampments, et cetera, express any concerns about drone and helicopter flyovers prior to the point in time?
No, we didn't hear anybody expressing concern. This is not something that is only done during the point in time count. It's something that's done throughout the year. So the teams that do the helicopters and drones are also our hot teams, our homeless outreach teams in different areas. And they do this so that they can engage with people all year long.
All right. So this one's for either Kat or Markea, so either one chime in or both of you. Did you have any other contingency plans for the day? You know, bad network in certain areas, and oh, my slides just switched over here for some reason. So I think it was getting to like when you didn't have a good connection.
Yeah, and I got excited and started typing my answers in the chat like a ding dong. But so yeah, if you're off network when you're conducting a survey in the app, then it stores the data and uploads it to the cloud when you get back onto the network. And then things like weather, certain things like, I mean, we live in the Midwest, so weather is, you know, it changes every 5 minutes. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to control for that. And so we just anticipate that the weather is going to be horrible the night of the count. And go from there. So it's a blessing when it isn't. We did postpone our count as well this year. It was a hard decision to make, and we know that, you know, then getting the data prepped and ready for submission at the end there'll be a shorter timeline, but it just didn't feel like the wise thing to do at the moment that we had chosen. And then I also typed a two-part answer to her question because, and I think you alluded to this, Matt, that the pre-work, you know, and canvassing ahead of time, even if you're in a smaller place, is very valuable time spent. And, you know, not everyone has access to drone technology or helicopters, but certainly at least knowing where your big encampments are and if they're active or not, you know, or where people should be. And if anyone's seen them in the neighborhood for a while, that is really valuable to put in that time beforehand. So when you go out and do the count, you can rely on, you know, that you know where you're supposed to be going.
Yeah, good call. Okay, any comments on that? Anything else to add?
Yeah, as far as like prepping for bad weather, luckily we don't have to do that too much here in San Diego. Right. Yeah,
this is true.
But we do, you know, this is where the value of your outreach staff is really important because they're keeping in touch with people all week long before the count. So if people are moving around, then you have a chance to send out your outreach team to locate them if they move because of weather or some other reason.
All right.
We also do a little business card size flyer with resources on it and just information that the count will be happening, and start distributing those as early as possible, so that people know what to expect and they know why the survey is happening, because people sometimes do get nervous about, why do you want to ask me all these questions, or, you know, so just kind of setting expectations around the pit is helpful too.
All right, very good. All right, this is for anyone, so I guess either one. You know, I think it's better for you both to answer. What are the consequences of police enforced street sweeps and encampment enforcement with legal penalties 1 week before the point in time count? Does this affect the accuracy of the point in time count, and the city's counties responsible to provide an accurate pit?
Yeah, so we, yeah, so with San Diego, we do work, luckily we have a really good relationship with our elected officials, including our mayor. So we do have a moratorium that there won't be any sweeps the week of the count. But again, this is, if people are being moved around for some reason, again, it's the benefit of having your outreach people engaged and knowing where people might have moved to, so that we can get them counted and know and have the proper amount of people out to that census tract if they were moved the week before. A little intel before you get there, I guess.
Good call. All right, so volunteer recruitment. How do you recruit volunteers and are able to sustain them for the upcoming point in time counts? Do you provide incentives? Do the volunteers assist with pre-canvassing of the community before the count?
Ours do, they do participate prior, because a lot of our volunteers are year-round volunteers who do street outreach or street level services for folks. We've been fortunate in that we have a pretty enthusiastic kind of community around point in time. but the last couple of years, we've only used staff of our agencies and some of these kind of more seasoned outreach workers because of the pandemic situation and really wanting to make sure that, you know, we just stick to the facts and stick to the script and we know what we're supposed to be doing and just try to keep it tight. But I think, you know, that's served us well, actually, because the point in time is actually really a great thing to rally around and people get excited about it. And for us that don't outreach every day, it's kind of like a party, you know, everyone gets together and we get to go out into the woods and stuff. And so a lot of folks in our community are really enthusiastic about it. I've heard of communities doing incentives, but we've just not been in the situation where we've had to do that. We buy them food and things like that, but not like any kind of cash incentives. For people that have lived experience, though, it is very important that you pay them if you're engaging them during the point in time.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, I would just say that also in our community, our volunteers are very enthusiastic. The 1,000 community volunteers that we have, I'd say probably about half of them are year to year. They want to know when the count's happening. They're excited to volunteer with us. They get their friends and families involved. We do have a high unsheltered population in our county, so it's very visual social issues. So I think people want to see how they can help no matter what. And we do have the relationship with our county where they do allow their employees as part of their workday to volunteer, and that helps. And we get input from community members all the time. We had kind of an interesting one this year where in our communities, we have those bird scooters, the mobile scooters, and we had somebody contact us that retrieves them from somewhere. I guess that's his job, to retrieve them and charge the batteries. And he sent us data of all the places he was encountering people that were unsheltered and with his drop pins. So he sent us and allowed us to use his data, and that does help us in areas we might not have realized people were. And we highlighted those on our census track. So you never know where you might get some community input.
Very interesting. Yeah. Those are fun, by the way. And a little dangerous but fun. All right. So question about the youth count. Let's see, for Kat and Markea, can you talk a bit about how you do the youth count? Is it done separately or added to the adult count? Any best practices here for the youth count? I'm not sure. Are they concerned to be, as they seem to be concerned to be counted?
We do both. We do it with the adult count, and then we have a supplemental count for youth that we try to capture from all youth, whether they're counted in the HIP or not, because we want to know a little bit more about their backstory. We've been strongly considering doing a separate youth count altogether around the fall rather than in January, and giving youth the opportunity to use a QR code and submit the survey themselves or do it by telephone or you know, on social media, those sorts of things, because it's an unofficial count and you can kind of use whatever methodology you want to. But we know that there's a lot of people that are not living unsheltered or even going to emergency shelter for lack of capacity who definitely need services. So it's kind of a both and for us.
Sure.
Yep, ours for the last several years, it's been a week-long count event. So it starts the night and morning of our traditional count, and then it goes the whole week. And they do different things. It's our youth providers that do the count. And this year they're doing 6 come and be counted sites, as well as doing some outreach. And we do include people on the survey that are couch surfing, which HUD does not consider technically homeless. We use all that information for planning purposes within our communities. So it is good to collect any sort of data from the youth that we can. And just kind of based from year to year, we change it a little bit, but we do let it have it led by youth providers, and they do use youth that are experiencing homelessness to help find and get people to participate as much as possible.
Yeah, I just piggyback on that. One of the common threads that we see with youth surveys in general, because there isn't a common, like one definitive survey instrument for that, and where a report we have to create. You know, as far as questions to ask, we do see involvement in foster care rising to the top. People want to know that. both gender identity and sexual orientation. And sexual orientation isn't one of the questions asked by HUD as far as the other survey. And that's your point, Kat. Yeah, we want to know the precariously housed and the doubled up. And so working with McKinney-Vento liaisons sometimes is a way to engage and get more kids from the school systems that are precariously housed or doubled up. So just the other points of consideration as far as best practices are concerned. Then we have a question regarding the cost of mobile technology, if it is feasible to answer. How much does this app technology cost a city to use and implement? How does it integrate? So I can speak for my company, Simtech Solutions, but there are other options out there. So, Simtech, we have a Counting Us app is our technology. And we really try to right size it for the community. There is no limit on how many surveys or how many volunteers that can use the tech, because you don't know what you're going to face the day of. So we actually look at the HUD funding model. So the annual renewal demand, as well as the formula actually looks at your past unsheltered counts as well. But if anyone has, you can share my contact information. It's just matt@simtechsolutions.com. I can follow up you directly to get pricing for your community. And then as far as the other vendors that are out there, I can't speak for their pricing. And then as far as our coverage area, we're supporting 57 of the, I think it's around 400 COCs this year. And it's roughly 25%. We are over 25% coverage of the entire United States as far as geographically. Just because partly because we work some large balance of state COCs too, that helps. There's that question. I don't know, Kat, or Marquette, if you want anything to follow on with that. No, all right. Do you have any advice for how to capture information from areas that are too unsafe to enter after dark? In Philadelphia, we have old Conrail tracks where we go during the day, but it's very unsafe after dark, so we don't go up. Any ideas or recommendations for counting or accounting for people in areas similar to that, even for people who are familiar with the zone? Good question.
Yeah, I think this is definitely where your outreach teams are very necessary. So hopefully they're familiar with the areas, and you can go out go out during daylight hours when it's safer and more easy to navigate. That's definitely, we have 35 deployment sites, but some of them don't start till 6 a.m. because we do wait till daylight hours before they go out, and then they count till 10 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. And then if they are really hard to reach areas like our riverbed, it's hard to reach. We use as our lead, there's the San Diego River Park Foundation. They're down there all the time. That's their body of work is the riverbed. So they lead the count down there every year. So just making sure you have people that are really knowledgeable and in order to stay safe. Yeah.
I think that, if you have the relationships by way of outreach too, these are perfect opportunities to engage people who live or have lived at those locations or who are familiar with the folks that live there. Those gatekeepers and those kind of relationships are really important. And, I think it's important to recognize too that a lot of folks, you can tell when the sun goes down who has a place to go and who doesn't. And so not doing the count in the evening, you're going to miss a lot of important information, but then there's also populations that live well within the margins that are not being engaged at all. And so a lot of those folks are easily found or more easily found at nighttime. And that's definitely the case with us, with some of our folks that are engaged in, trafficking and things like that. So I think gatekeepers is critical if you have the capacity and the relationship capital to get that going.
Yeah, for sure. I might piggyback on that too, in that if you have the opportunity to bring in police presence, I know there's sometimes people will shut down to the police. It really depends on your police if they're more punitive or supportive, right? So if you have police that are welcomed, then I'd encourage having them go to the areas that are higher risk. So that was our last question. That lets us wrap up. So that's the end of our session. Thank you for coming. And please remember to take the conference survey that follows. And best of luck to you for that. All of you haven't done your count yet. And we're wrapping up the ones that have already done it.